Brilliant. Hello, everyone. I think we'll make a start there. Hopefully you've had a chance to grab some food and a drink. It's lovely to see so many of you standing room only, which is always what we like to see. So this is an event on devolution and on place and on health and how we can utilize devolution to create healthy places. So a very topical, very important discussion, and one we're delighted to be having with you today. Before anything else, I'd like to kick off by thanking the Health Foundation, who we're running this event in partnership with. It wouldn't be happening without them. So a big thank you to the Health Foundation, who have obviously been doing a lot of very good work for a lot of time on this topic as well. So we're really delighted to be running it together. Now, I just want to give a few thoughts on this topic before introducing and turning to our lovely panelists. But really the kind of entry point for me is from something IPPR are running called the Commission on Health and Prosperity. And our contention through that commission has been that a fairer country is a healthier country is a more prosperous one. And we've been doing lots of thinking about what is it that creates the conditions of good health that can in turn deliver prosperity. And the overwhelming conclusion that we have to come to is that as important as the National Health Service is, and as important as answers are to that, in fact, the things that really matter, the things that matter the most of all, are the places we live, where we work, where we play, where we grow. And so thinking through how we can make sure we get those things right as a foundation for good health and in turn a foundation for prosperity feels like one of the most important questions on that agenda to me, and one that hopefully we can shed some light on together and get some answers on here today. Now, we have a brilliant panel lined up, so I'll try to do less talking, give them space. But delighted today to be joined by Mayor Dan Norris. So a big welcome. You might remember Dan from being a former environment minister, a former MP, a child protection officer with the NSPCC, a business owner in the past, and something that will endear him to my parents, who are big bee campaigners, a campaigner for bee and pollinators as well, which is brilliant. We're joined by Emily Darlington, Labour and Cooperative Councillor for Bletchley East, Cabinet Member for Adults, Housing and Healthy Communities, a prospective parliamentary candidate, and a former Special Advisor at HM Treasury. Certainly in my work, all paths lead back to Treasury, so I think having that dual expertise will be really fascinating for us to hear about. Then going to my left, joined by Afia Poco-Amanfo, who is a research fellow at IPPR. Afia is the most travelled member of my team. She's been going around the country talking to people in places about what they think good health means, what it looks like, what they want to see from the future. So we'll be really excited to hear what people themselves have been saying and what's been part of their vision. And last but not least, by Joe Bibby, Director of Health at the Health Foundation. Joe leads on the Foundation's Healthy Lives strategy and team, but has had a career spanning a good amount of time in the Department of Health. It says here 10 years, rather you than me on that one, and was head of NHS performance, including leading the programme Pursuing Perfection. So we're really excited to hear what you have to say as well, Jay. I'm going to give each of the panelists a couple of minutes just to give some initial thoughts on the topic. I'm going to ask a few questions, but we'll make sure that there's plenty of time for everyone here to ask questions as well. So as we're talking, as we hear reflections from the panelists, then do be thinking a little bit about what your questions might be, and we'll come to those in just a little bit. So without further ado, I think we're turning to Dan, to you first, if that's okay.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, look, I'm trying to see you all because the light is coming into my eyes and I can't see you. So it's lovely to see you. Thank you very much to IPPR for holding this event. And can I thank you not just for what you do of late, but what you've done over many decades in helping Labour governments and Labour in opposition, sadly, get things right and better. I can remember, I suppose my first involvement with IPPR was when Matthew Taylor was at the helm, and you had great people like Dr. Wendy Pyatt, head of education, all sorts of things. And ever since then, there's been a strong series of fantastically capable people with real insights, helping Labour, because we do need that help. Because without question, you are my favourite think tank because you're the best. But you're the best because you get it right, you know what you're doing, and you understand the challenges that we face. So thank you very much for all that you do. So thank you all as well for everyone who's come here this conference week to this event. Now, as a Metro Mayor for the West of England, let me tell you a little bit about where it is, because you won't all know. My name's Dan Norris. The West of England comprises of Bristol, the World Heritage City of Bath, and the surrounding districts. It's the home of people like... let me think, J.K. Rowling, who I went to school with, Mary Berry, who I didn't go to school with, in case anyone thinks I'm the same age, and Banksy, who I may have gone to school with, but I wouldn't have known it because he's anonymous. So it's a fantastic area. Please come and spend lots of money, just like this fantastic area has been renovated and generated. And I know Merseyside quite well because I lived in Huyton some years ago. When I was in love with somebody, and as you often move around the country because of your love life, I know that it's improved greatly. Not my love life, sadly, but my understanding of Merseyside. So what would I say? Well, look, there's all sorts of ways that you can improve the health of your communities as a Metro Mayor. One of the interesting things that I've been doing is been involved in financing and helping GPs prescribe activities like cycling and walking, and literally on a prescription, which I think is quite a radical idea, but an important one. And there weren't many sort of silver linings out of the pandemic, but I think one of them was our understanding and full appreciation of the importance of getting out and about, fresh air, sometimes the countryside if you're able to access it, and how important that is to our health and well-being. I think that is something that we've all perhaps come to appreciate more than ever, albeit in very difficult circumstances. The other thing is practical things like warm homes. Now, in my region of over 1 million people, we have approximately 250,000, 250,000 homes that are leaky, that are not well insulated and what have you. I am looking at you, some of you will have read, I'm sure, on the BBC News, if not elsewhere, about this satellite that can look down and look at where heat is coming from. And I'm very keen to get my region scanned because I want to identify exactly where those 250,000 homes are. I don't know how, I'm sure it's someone like IPPR who worked that out. How you do that, I do not know. But I now want to see where those homes are so that I can start doing something with a retrofit program that I've already started to introduce. Very important that we insulate homes, get air-sourced and ground-sourced heat pumps in and all the rest of it. Because that is the way that we change the climate emergency. That's the way we tangibly improve the situation. And we help people in the process. And it raises very interesting challenges, because if you represent an area as diverse as mine, where you have Bristol and some real social and economic need, and you contrast that with Bath, which is a World Heritage City with huge Georgian homes and what have you, it raises interesting questions, like when this photograph, where it shows me where all the heat's leaking from, will I find that it's all the big Georgian houses in Bath with single-pane glass, owned probably by quite prosperous people? And do I start there from the environmental perspective, because that's where most heat is being lost? Maybe. We'll find out what the truth is. Or do I look at some of the working-class estates in Bristol, where that help and support would be desperately needed in terms of the impact it would have on those people's lives, but may not necessarily reduce the carbon emissions as much as dealing with it in some parts of prosperous Bath? So it's going to create an interesting set of challenges and discussions. And in terms of transport's an area I have key responsibility for. The congestion in the West of England costs my economy £300 million a year. Again, I don't know how guys like IPPR work these things out. It fascinates me, but that's a huge cost that we need to sort. There are also 300 premature deaths a year in my region because of air pollution and things like that. That's why I'm introducing things that have multi-benefits when it comes to policy. I believe the era of a single policy issue has now gone. We can't afford to do that. We have to hit more than one target in any policy initiative. That's why I've introduced something called birthday buses. It allows people in my region, in the month of their birthday, to travel as much as they want for as many journeys as they want on any route that they want on buses. And there's several reasons for it. The first one is that there's a cost of living crisis. and you can immediately save a 12th of your annual fares on buses because you've got a month of free travel. It also deals with that pollution, it also deals with that congestion, but because it's for the whole month of someone's birthday, it's 30 days or maybe 31 days in some months where people can really start to think about changing their behavior, because we know from all the research that if you change your behavior for about 30 days, you're more likely to change it ongoingly. And I am desperate to get people, not to stop them using their cars, but to use their cars less frequently, because that is key to the climate emergency, frankly. We've got to change that behavior. And the exciting bit for me is that, look, the solutions we try and come up with will never be perfect at the outset. So what I'm very excited about with birthday buses is that it allows us to collect data on the individuals who are using those buses and when, and work out how to get an even better system in the future, because a snapshot is not enough. We have to be at the cutting edge of developments and human behavior as we go forward if we're really serious about the climate emergency. And the other fantastic thing about birthday buses is everybody knows the month of their birthday. And I could have let everybody use the buses all at once, but they would have had a terrible experience because they wouldn't have been able to get on the bus. So by staggering it and staging it over the year and knowing that people will remember the month of their birthday, we're hopefully managing demand and learning important information to improve things even more in the future. I've said enough. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dan. And I love the idea of birthday buses. I hadn't heard of it, but I was hoping it might have something to do with party buses, but I think that's an even better scheme. Emily, why don't we come to you next and your take?
I'm definitely going to investigate bringing birthday buses to Milton Keynes. So like you, my love life brought me to Milton Keynes, and I think maybe it's been more successful than you, yours, but you know.
Well, I didn't know you knew about my love life in Milton Keynes. I'm impressed you know that as well.
And I'm going to talk, we're a unitary authority, and I'm going to talk a little bit, so we have health and social care, as well as housing, as well as bins, as well as your potholes. And so that puts us in quite a unique situation. And I very much start with the premise, strong communities make us more resilient, and they make us healthier. And in order to do that, really apply that through a local authority lens, is we have identified through the determinants of health our 7 most deprived estates. And we have said, look, we're going to have regeneration and renewal, but that's not just going to be by the council. It's not just about housing. It is also about your health and well-being, your job prospects, your employment opportunity, your public realm. And that's going to be done in conjunction with you. And we've set up these estate renewal forums, and they identify their priorities out of that. And we, as the council, one of our biggest powers is to convene, right? So we can get the police to the table, we can get the ambulance service to the table, we can get the hospitals to the table, we can get the GPs to the table. And in the estate that's in my ward in Bletchley East, called the Lakes Estate, one of the things we identified through that process was the high take-up of antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds. Now, the prescriptions were just out of kilter with the rest of the city. And so we looked at that and said, actually, what's going on there? We've got a GP you can't get an appointment to see because they're around. You've got a population that is feeling stressed, lonely, and many other things compounded by COVID. Actually, can we come together with the GP, with the health service, and actually say, is there something we can do at a local level? Very much for the local community to put on, to tackle that low-level mental health and that loneliness. And so we created this thing called Lakes Clubs, funded by the NHS, but delivered through the council, but delivered by people in that community. So they set up bingo nights, they set up film nights, they set up talking cafes, they set up a series of initiatives to hopefully bring down those prescriptions. And they have. It has brought down. And that's not something you could ever have done at Westminster, because that is something particular to that estate, delivered and run by that estate. And we've created a framework to say to the NHS, we can help you actually stop some of the demand coming in. Another thing that can only be done at local level is really focusing on those differences. In Milton Keynes, I'm going to talk a lot about Milton Keynes because it is the center of the country. Quite literally, it is the center of the country. But it has a certain age demographic, given its age. We have the fastest growing over 65 population. We also have our dementia numbers doubling in the next 5 years. That's something particular to Milton Keynes. And I'm determined to make us the most dementia-friendly city in the UK. And that's not just about having a little village where people with dementia live. It's actually about saying, as a city, we want you to stay as active and as engaged for as long as possible. And we want your carer, who's often your husband or your wife, to not feel isolated, that they can't go out with you anymore, that you can no longer undertake those activities that you love to do, whether it's the weekly shop or going to the restaurant or going to the cinema. And again, this is not, we do all the dementia pathways, and we have the dementia nurses and the Admiral nurses that come in like Macmillan, but this is about, on top of that, this is about the council, again, using that power to convene to challenge the shopping centre, to challenge the cinema, to challenge the police force, to say, do you understand what it's like, and can you adapt your environment to make sure it's still comfortable to go out? That it's still one of those things you enjoy. And that was inspired by, my gran, that was our activity. And even when she got dementia, I still took her, she was in Penarth in Wales, still took her to the M&S. That M&S, the reason we went there, cafe, they had wheelchairs that you could just borrow. She didn't need a wheelchair, but to go shopping, she got tired. And there was no fear that her behavior, there was a changing room I could go into with her. And those few adaptations meant that until about a year before she died at 101, we were still going on our shopping trips together. And that made all the difference. And so finally, actually, I'm going to leave it there because I've spoken a lot, but these are the sorts of things that we're looking at in terms of how you bring that health right into the community, how you don't pretend that it's always about professionals, how you don't say to people, well, to get people to stop smoking, we just need to tell them how bad it is. I can tell you for sure, every person that smokes knows how bad it is for them. So if you're not in those communities, there's no point doing Rishi's suggestion, which is a good one, but actually, is that going to help people stop smoking? No, because it's a diktat from Westminster, rather than something co-created in the communities that are affected.
Brilliant. Go for it. Brilliant. We're 10 minutes into, 15 minutes into our event on community. I already feel more enthused about the kind of change we can create in the country than often in much longer in national conversations. Afia, it seems a good time maybe to bring in some of your work, some of your research. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess, so the starting question for this panel was, how can devolution under Labour empower healthy, prosperous communities? And so I think it's now sort of widely accepted within the progressive policy space that sort of more devolution deals are needed to start to sort of tackle those drivers that are causing poor health. But beyond this, I think we haven't quite created a framework for local leaders and for government in ensuring that those new deals that we're talking about are essentially meaningful, which means once those powers are given to local leaders, they can actually sort of act on those powers and use them sufficiently to sort of directly influence the health of their sort of local population. And so social determinants, of course, are a big part of this conversation, and they've been spoken about for some time, and they're key to getting to that prevention point when it comes to poor health outcomes, rather than a sort of hyperfixation on healthcare, which it tends to sort of meet people at the point where they're already sick. So to really drive up that prevention agenda, I think we're going to need sort of every place, every locality across the country to have the skills, the capacity, the expertise as well, and the buying and the consent, as sort of Emily was sort of speaking to as well. So from the communities in the consenting, their consent to sort of, when it comes to leadership, to sort of drive that change. And so to bring in some of the context of the work that we've been doing doing at IPPR, over the past year, we've undertaken research looking at how health inequalities persist at both the regional level, but even more so within places as well. And we firstly found that there's a 7-year gap in healthy life expectancy between the most affluent areas and the most deprived areas. So where you live outright can determine how long you live and how healthy that life will actually be. But also at that really sort of more granular level within places, there's large variation. So you could switch literally from one road to another, and you could see how people's lives really, really differ. So for example, in the context of London, there are boroughs like Kensington and Chelsea and Tower Hamlets, and we tend to understand those places as being home to some of the wealthiest people in this country, which is absolutely right, but it's also home to some of the poorest too. So within the same postcodes, a street away, your life outcomes could be substantially different. So the problems that we're dealing with in places are multi-layered, and I think local leaders really need a framework that can support them to sort of work with these issues. And our work has also shown that the types of power and capacity leaders need have to give them the leverage to be bold and to take interventionist approaches, as that's really essential to these problems, and they do persist at scale in some areas. And those communities in particular should benefit the most from new sort of deals that come from Westminster. And by having these new powers, I think local leaders, many of whom already actually have the finger on the pulse on what is actually going on in their communities, and that's across public services, so including but not just limited to the NHS, but also beyond our public sector, so businesses, voluntary and third sector organisations who all have a role, in my opinion, to play in creating a healthier population. So I think any conversation regarding health and Devo really needs to encompass sort of the most prevalent issues. So from transport, that's already been mentioned, food poverty. In some of the participatory work that we were doing this year, I mean, I can remember quotes in my head, people saying we've got nurses using food banks. I mean, that's the reality of what's going on. The environment, green spaces, housing. We've heard the stories about, babies dying in damp homes, like Awab Ishak in Rochdale. I mean, that's the reality right now. Early years in childcare, addiction, substance abuse, and good and decent jobs, so fair wages, and then also those social aspects as well. So social isolation, the relationships that people have, do they have spaces and places to meet and greet people and develop those relationships so they feel really part of their community? And then also just how local leaders work in collaboration with their communities, actually feel that their communities are partners in this work. And so it's kind of doing things with communities, not to them. And I guess I say this because throughout our participatory research that we've done, people have categorically said that they feel powerless about the decisions that are made over their lives. So we went to somewhere in South London, Scotland, in the Northwest as well. Everyone categorically said that they feel powerless, and there's quite little trust for politicians. So local leaders need to be thinking about how, if they get a new set of powers, that they can use them to strengthen their communities and local democracy as well, and then implement new approaches that can really respond to what people need. So yeah, I guess I'll leave it there, but yeah.
Brilliant, thank you very much. It strikes that the size of the prize is so amazing. We, in previous Commission on Health and Prosperity work, challenged the government to try to make the UK the healthiest country in the world. Japan has done that transition from a very unhealthy to a very healthy country. And we get asked, is that possible? Well, it's already happening in Wokingham. It's already healthier than any other country in the world. So that, I think, is the size of the prize of getting some of the things right that you've mentioned. Jo, over to you. What do you make of it?
Yeah, well, thank you. So kind of having listened to everyone, I've been sort of thinking, won't say that, I'll say something else. Just to sort of really reflect on what I've heard. So the Health Foundation, if you don't know us, we're an independent charity, and we do work to improve health and care across the UK. We do that through funding research, improvement work, policy analysis, and so on. And for the last 5 years, we've had a big focus beyond the NHS, actually looking at what helps people stay healthy for longer. And clearly place is really critical to that. So we have a big programme of work now looking at the role of local government and combined authorities in creating healthy places. And I think one of the things that's really struck me, having sort of working in this space now, having worked a lot in the NHS, is actually the way in which local leaders do kind of really take this challenge on and kind of hold it and sort of have this sense of leadership and responsibility for the people who live where they lead. And you know, it's great hearing the kind of examples, and I think also hearing the way in which people are making the connections now between things like housing, transport, jobs and so on, and health outcomes. But I think we can't get away from the fact that there's still huge variations in people's lives at the moment. So we've talked about the life expectancy gap, but if we look at child obesity, 34% of children are obese in the local authorities with the highest levels of child obesity. In the lowest, it's 12%. So 34% versus 12% difference. If you look at admissions for alcohol harm, that ranges from 2,500 per 100,000 of population to 255, so a tenfold difference between different local authorities around the country. If you look at the number of people who are unable to work because of poor health, that ranges from around 10% in Liverpool Walton through to 1.5% in Wokingham, so a tenfold difference. So what really strikes me here, I guess, is that we have local leaders who really want to make a difference for the people in the places that they lead, yet we still see these huge inequalities, both in outcomes and the sort of factors driving that. And I think what this does speak to is that, yes, there needs to be the local leadership and there needs to be this purposeful decision-making that we've kind of heard from some of the other panellists about how they make the connections between transport and more active lifestyles or access to work or better housing. But we also do need to recognise that local government is up against it at the moment. It's seen huge funding cuts. We know that the councils who are at the brink of bankruptcy and some have gone bankrupt. So this is a kind of problem that we're facing. So I think when we're thinking about this, for me, there's something about three layers. There's the context that nationally needs to be created so that there's the right funding and investment in place and the right incentives. There's the local leadership, and there's ample, really good local leadership around the country, but needs to be learning from what's working in different places and how that can be shared. And then I think the engagement with communities and actually knowing that some of these things that really make a difference to people's lives really are hyper-local, and how people and councils work with local communities to find what works for them. So I think devolution is kind of part of that thread that needs to run through the whole system if we're going to line things up. But I would really say there's kind of a long way to go, and the work that we do at the Health Foundation is about looking long term. So we've published a report quite recently looking at future projections in poor health of the health burden in the UK. And what we're seeing is that because of the ageing demographic, because of factors that we know cause poor health, we're going to see rising burdens of poor health. So this is something that isn't going to go away, and we need to have a healthier population if we're going to have a more prosperous country, as IPPR say. So I think there's a lot local leaders can do, but we need that enabling context as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone, for those immediate reflections. Move into a bit of discussion, but I'll say again, do be thinking of your questions, and we'll come to those in just a minute. Dan, I wanted to come off the back of what Joe said there about the long way to go and see what you thought, because it strikes me that there are lots of really very optimistic things that devolved power can create. It also strikes me that there are probably means and powers that are still needed, and there's still probably a backing of local and regional leaders that we need to see. What's your experience of it? Do you think that there are more powers that need to come? Are there things that block initiatives? Are there difficulties that you come up against?
Yeah, there are certainly difficulties. Now, when people talk about combined authorities, obviously we'll be very familiar with all our various metro mayors, but we're not all the same. And that, of course, is part of what devolution is about, that you have deals that reflect your area. But what I would say is that the Conservative government, in creating metro mayors and regional government, kind of did a funny devolution, because what it really wasn't about was taking powers and resources from Westminster so much and passing them down, but rather taking them away from unitary or local councils. And that's created quite bitter and awful tensions. Also, the Tories, in order to get agreement, promised lots of money and allowed some negotiations in areas like mine, where it isn't overwhelmingly Labour, that make it hard for me to do some of the things that I'd like to do. So, for example, on some of the key votes that I have to have, where I have to get agreement from local councils, it requires unanimity. So, for example, I have something called a spatial development plan, which is quite unique to my area, which is about working out how many houses you're going to build over the next 25 years and where you're going to put jobs and infrastructure and all the rest of it. It only takes one council leader to not vote, and it gets stopped. And that's exactly what happened. Surprise, surprise, it was a Tory leader. So, you know, it's all those kind of difficulties. However, what I would say is that I'm hearing encouraging things from Labour colleagues who are hopefully going to be in the Labour government, where they are going to hopefully recognise that situation. So, for example, a really helpful thing is that rather than central government, when it gives money, giving it to a combined authority, which if it goes to Andy Burnham is effectively letting him have control because it's all Labour councils pretty much, to give it to the Metro Mayor, whoever she or he is, so that in situations where you've got effectively a marginal seat like I have as a Metro Mayor, I can actually show what Labour's about and make a difference, and then persuade the voters that Labour's the best thing since sliced bread, and then hopefully we get the majority Labour councils right across the region. But at the moment, we're held back, and that's something that does need to change, and Keir Starmer is aware of that, and you know, we're having to think hard about that. The one thing I wanted to just say in response to what I heard earlier about dementia, that is a real challenge coming down the tracks. It's interesting to hear how it's affecting Milton Keynes very, very soon. If not already. But I do know that, you know, in 20, 30 years' time in my region and probably across the country, 1 in 10 of us will either have a relative or a person who we know who is suffering from dementia. And the consequences of that are quite significant. I don't think people have got their heads around that yet. And that does mean that people like me have got to think about, in terms of housing, about modular designs, because first of all, moving house is an expensive business, as we know, for all the reasons that you'll perfectly understand. But also, there's something about continuity of communities. I think we should be looking at homes that allow people to live in them for a long time through different stages in their life. Maybe when they're starting out as a young couple, or whatever arrangement they want to have. You have a certain arrangement, then you get to a middle stage of your life when you've brought up your children or whatever, and you may want to have more office space as you work remotely. And then maybe as you're in the older stage of your life, you may want to have a walk-in shower on the ground floor, for example. And modular homes allow you to do that if you plan for those, because the outer shell of the building stays the same, but you're able to change the shape of rooms quite easily and relatively cost-effectively. And that makes a lot of sense to me, because we build homes that are very fixed, and they kind of force people at different stages of their lives to be in a certain area, which I also think isn't good for society. I think it's good to have a mix of different people, different age groups, and all the rest of it, because it enriches our society. And the other thing was child obesity. I want to come back onto your point, because look, we know this in the Labour movement. When I was in the last Labour government, we put a lot of emphasis on early years and all the rest of it. But it's most clearest in some ways when it comes to child obesity, because we reflect in our country obesity profiles and all the rest of it that are much more like America than mainland Europe. And one of the downsides is that many of our young people are obese. And that is worse than you'd ever think, not just for the obvious reason of young people now, but there's very good science that shows that if you are a younger person who is obese, even if you become a non-obese adult, your health outcomes are worse. So it's better to be a slim child to become an obese adult overall in your lifetime than the other way around. So we really must concentrate on healthy eating, you know, how we make sure that people get, young people in particular at school and all the rest of it, get the proper nutrition that they need. They're able to be active and exercise a lot in a safe way. I come from a child protection background, as Chris mentioned, trained by the NSPCC, and one of the downsides of making people aware of the dangers and helping ensure children stay safe is that we now are over safeguarding in some ways, because we don't allow our children to go and run free and be active and have a healthy lifestyle. We do need to recalibrate that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Super interesting. it sparks a thought, Emily, that I wanted to come to you on, which is, and it's hard to pick which of your hats to go with, but as the parliamentary candidate for Milton Keynes Central, I imagine you're knocking on lots of doors at weekends and similar. It's often said that it's very difficult to move the agenda from the NHS to public health and the social determinants because the political capital of a hospital or an NHS building is always very powerful. We've seen that the government's pledge at the last election, it was 40 new hospitals. How do you think we can make this a politically appealing and salient issue, or do you think actually it is already?
Well, I think it is already. I think the first thing is the reason the government focuses on 40 new hospitals is because really that's all they can deliver. They can't deliver the things that we're talking about, which are in the community, because that would be a very long speech if they were. And the reality is, it wouldn't be accepted by communities if it was a government-run scheme, let's be honest. But where I do think it's very salient is when we're out there talking about the cost of living crisis, yes, that is the absolute number one reason for obesity, cost of food. It's not because people don't know how to cook, it is because of how much cheaper it is to buy stuff that's unhealthy than it is to buy stuff that's healthier. So we shouldn't just be saying, well, I'm not going to be like some Tory minister that says, what we need to do is teach them how to cook. They know how to budget. They know how to cook. That's not the problem. What they're calculating is how much cheaper is my energy bill going to be if I put it in the microwave rather than if I have to turn the hob on. And that is the most micro budgeting you'll ever see. So how do we sell it? We sell it by saying, we're going to help you tackle the cost of living. We are going to create those opportunities. We're going to say, we're going to create opportunities so that you can be there for your children after school and take them to the park, instead of them with their latchkey going in and playing on their PS2 or whatever it is that the kids are playing on these days, because I've banned them from my house. But, these are actually things and the conversations we're having on the doorstep. And the key demographic for us at the next election is mums. If mums turn to Labour, we win a majority. And this is the kind of conversation I have on this when I'm dropping my kids off at school or I'm picking them up. This is the kind of conversation that hasn't hit the national political rhetoric, but this is the conversation we have. Can you get a dentist appointment? Well, hopefully it'll be with the Labour government. I mean, that's the conversation we need to change. And mums get it. We talk about it anyways.
Brilliant. That's really, really fascinating. Joe, it's something I wanted to come on to you for, really kind of leading off that interaction between our health and economic considerations, in that case, cost of food, poverty. It feels at the moment it's never really been clearer that health and the economy are interacting profoundly, and that it might make a lot of this harder if we've got poor health and worse economic outcomes in the same places. What do you think the relationship is between the two, and does it make that relationship harder to act where we most need to act?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting, really, I think over the last 6 months or so, how there's been so much more discussion about this relationship between economic inactivity and poor health. And it's almost like suddenly health is turning into the currency that a lot of decision makers care about, which is whether people can work or not. So I think there is an opportunity here to sort of build on that, because it's also a problem that's not going to go away. So as I said before, I think, there's 2.6 million people in the UK who are unable to work on health grounds. So that's like 1.5 times the size of Greater Manchester. I mean, it's a huge amount of our population, who aren't doing work, which is probably, if it's the right work, it's going to kind of give them some purpose and enjoyment and social connection. And it also has implications for our economy and lost tax revenue, and also then the sort of subsequent services that need to be there. So I think there is something happening now that it's not possible to ignore the levels of poor health, because it is starting to knock on into sort of the wider economic situation. The other thing is it's not going away. So the future projections work that we've done at the Health Foundation shows that the population of people with at least one major condition is going to rise by 37% by 2040. The working age population is going to rise by 4%. So there's going to be a real shift in the dependency ratio from people who are sort of able to work and people who are not going to be in a position to be able to work. So we've got to start thinking about how do we help people stay healthy for longer, and how do we help people stay in jobs where maybe, you know, currently there are barriers that stop them staying in employment. So I think there's two things. One, we've got to be thinking about the quality of work that is in places. Like, are there jobs that are providing security, that are providing, you know, decent pay, that are allowing for progression and development, that have the flexibility, that mean that people who have got health problems or have got caring responsibilities for other people with health problems, that they can stay and work and manage those responsibilities. So I think there's a big agenda for employers to think about the sort of quality of employment that's on offer. And I think also we need to be thinking through, you know, Department of Work and Pensions, what are the services and how do we invest in the services through Job Centre Plus and universal support to help people make that transition if they've fallen out of work, get them back into work and give them the support they need. And I think we've got to be looking at that both at the sort of older age of the population, where people are kind of, you know, becoming ill with sort of all the classic long-term conditions we know about. But the other thing that we really can't ignore is that young people and mental health is increasing. And that's something that actually, if we allow that to happen and don't kind of provide the support and intervention early, that will have a lifetime scarring effect.
Really powerfully put, thank you. Afir, if I come to you, I'm interested in whether there are things that you've seen in your research. Are there places or case studies of where this is going well, or that we should be thinking about as examples of getting this right?
Yeah, I mean, I think on Joe's point was really interesting about like young people, because I think with CAM services and the state of that, and that's playing out in education, that's obviously having a really bad effect on places. I think when you look at some sort of local leaders, in the case of London, we have free school meals, and that's a universal thing. If you look at the kind of threshold of who can be eligible for free school meals, that's quite a really low threshold. So you have lots of children going into schools. I mean, I've seen lots of examples where children are essentially asking for scraps at lunchtime because they're not eligible for free school meals, so their parents can't give them any money. And I think obviously that leads to people then eating foods that are not so good for them, fast foods, that kind of thing. I think Amsterdam is a really great case study of tackling food poverty and obesity amongst young people. We've also seen it in this country, in Leeds as well. And I think, I mean, lots of this stuff is about capacity and resourcing that local leaders obviously need. But I think there's something that we sometimes forget when we have these conversations, which is about the passions and the willpower that actual individual leaders have and the trust that they actually have amongst their community. So in the case of Amsterdam, that local leader had a real passion for tackling obesity amongst young people. And the community could tell and could essentially see that and trusted that and kind of bought into the kind of interventionist public health programs that they had there. So I think, yeah, essentially it's not to kind of take for granted sort of the power of local leaders and the trust that they might have with their communities.
Brilliant, really well put, thank you. I'm going to bring us over to questions, so hopefully you've had a bit of time. I am going to ask so that we can just fit in as many questions as possible, that contributions are genuinely questions rather than monologues, but I'm sure you would have done that anyway. Someone here will go to first.
Yeah, I'm Emma Williamson.
Oh, we have a roving mic, so we'll mic you up.
Hi, Emma Williamson. I'm the Deputy Leader of Cumberland Council and the Executive Member for Children and Family Wellbeing and Housing. How do we sell devolution, so it's not just another layer of bureaucracy to communities such as mine who've just gone through unitarisation, which has resulted in a 28 million deficit in our budget?
Great question, thank you. On the front row here.
Hi all, Alex Osborne. I am National Influencing Manager at Alzheimer's Society, so very pleased to hear the focus on dementia in the panel. My question, bearing in mind what panellists have said about the kind of financial pressure that's on local authorities, is when you have conditions like dementia where prevalence is on the rise, we know 1.6 million people will have the condition by 2040. How do we, in the context of financial constraints, make the best case we can for investment in conditions like dementia at a local level?
Yeah. We'll take one more so that we have a few to go with. Yes, gentleman here.
Hi, I'm Lawrence. I'm the president of the Labour Society at Southampton Uni. This is more of a question for Dan. For somewhere like Bristol and Bath, there's quite different areas. What case can you make for devolution with areas like that for somewhere like Southampton and Portsmouth, for example, where the areas are quite different? What unique challenges do you face and what unique benefits do you get from being able to govern such different areas?
Brilliant, great question, thank you. So we've got, how do we sell devolution so it doesn't come across as more bureaucracy to people that have had to put up with probably their fair share and cuts as well? How do we make the case for local level action on dementia as we see that prevalence going up? And how do we make the case for devolution in places like Bristol and Bath, and then comparing that to some other places that nearby, Portsmouth and Southampton? Dan, why don't we come to you first on those?
Okay, so I'll try and go in order. I don't know if my mic's working. Yes, it is. Emma, you point to what Labour Metro Mayors are doing in power, and you use that as an example to say why devolution is a good idea, because there are incredible initiatives that are happening way beyond the stuff that I'd like to think I'm doing. Other Metro Mayors are doing fantastic things, the Labour ones, and you can juxtapose that against the Tory Metro Mayors who aren't doing those things. So you use living, real examples to show what Labour does in power, and that's exactly what we need to do as we run into this important general election. And then, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Apologies for that. It's cheaper to address dementia through the kind of things I was talking about, modular housing, because the alternative is lots of people going into hospitals, bed blocking, all the rest of it. In other words, it makes sense. It's more efficient. It costs less to the economy and the taxpayer to do the right thing. And the great thing is it's a better outcome for the people concerned and the families and the people who are supporting and caring for them. So it makes good common sense. So that's a very strong argument. And then Lawrence, was it? Yeah, Lawrence. Well, look, first of all, you make sure that bridges in Southampton haven't got blue lighting. It does help that, so that you don't piss everybody off in Southampton, because it looks like it's the Pompey colours and all that. So that would be fundamentally helpful. For those of you who don't know, there was a bit of a scandal because a bridge in Southampton had blue lights, and if you're a Southampton fan, with the Saints being in red and the Pompey Portsmouth team in blue, that is best avoided, I would say. The straight answer is it's not such a challenge as you might think. It actually adds to what you can do, I think, as a mayor or a leader, because diversity is your strength. And what you can do is run all sorts of different initiatives in parallel, because actually the uniqueness of an area and the range and diversity that's there is what gives your area its unique selling point. And you use that to best effect. But what I'd simply say is, whatever your makeup is, it's about being ready for when government makes resource available. One of the things that I found very difficult as a Metro Mayor, and continue to do so, particularly under this Tory lot at the moment, who, you wouldn't send them over the road to fetch you a newspaper, would you? They're just that bad, basically. But they've, for example, they announced, or I don't know if they did announce or don't know if they did announce, it's never clear what they did, but apparently they were on the government website. They were going to give me £100 million supposedly for a mass transit system. Then the next day it was taken down, and then it was back up again for something else, and all this kind of thing. What a Labour government must do, and I know money will be tight and very difficult after Liz Truss completely ruined the economy, and all that money that she wasted was all the money that we were going to do lots of important things with, so it's going to be difficult. But what it would be great is if the Labour government is able to say, here is funding for several years to allow me, even if it's tight funding, to allow me to make plans, and to allow me also to be prepared if additional money then becomes available. Because even the Tory government offer me money, but it's like they say, here's 50 million to spend, but you've got to spend it in the next 3 weeks. That's just never possible. It just doesn't happen. And although I'm a bit loath to say this, Michael Gove, who was one of the better Tory ministers in terms of competency, even he has given 2 billion quid back from his department, the Levelling Up department, to central government because he couldn't get on and spend it. So we've got to change the way government does its business and the timelines, because this is serious money that can make a huge difference to the people, particularly we care about in the labour movement, and yet we're not able to do that because all the systems are almost conspiring to stop you spending money. I can't remember what the figure is, 300 million, I think, in my combined authority bank account, that I'd like to be in the local regional economy, helping during a cost of living crisis where everybody's struggling. And yet, for bureaucracy and all the rest of it, I'm not able to do that. So we need to change that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Same questions to you, Emily. And
I think we have to remember when we're talking about devolution, it's not, as great of a Metro Mayor as you are, it's not as appropriate necessarily for all parts of the country. And devolution actually has to be about deciding where power best sits, where resources best sit. And so I'm always pushing myself, even as a unitary, actually, is it best sitting and being held in the unitary, or should it go down to parishes or communities? And that's really the interesting discussion for me. Yes, getting it out of Westminster, but let's get it as close to people making those decisions and delivering services with us as possible. On dementia, it's not just, I told you my story about my gran. Everybody's getting a story like that. As you said, Dan, 1 in 10 in Milton Keynes. It's a bit higher. But the reality is, if we don't actually think what we're doing with our planning, what we're doing with our public realm services, including landscaping and wayfinding and rubbish collection, the pressure we put is not just on the person with dementia, but more importantly, we're putting that pressure on the person who's caring for them. I said most often, it's their husband or wife or their child. And the reality is, when they can no longer cope, they go into care homes and they go into hospital beds. And that's where the real cost starts to happen in terms of financial. But the emotional cost starts much, much earlier. And so if we can create environments where people can live independently as well for as long as possible, we are actually saving ourselves financially, but we're actually creating those stronger communities as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Joe, same questions.
Maybe just to answer it a slightly different way, I think the challenge that we face in terms of poor health and health inequalities in this country is going to need long-term solutions. There aren't going to be any quick fixes. And the only way you get long-term solutions is if you ultimately have a kind of consensus across the political spectrum. And so I do think it's really important that we start to frame health in a slightly different way so that we can get councils across the country on board with that. And kind of just a couple of thoughts on that. One is, in West Midlands, there's a mayor, and it is a Conservative mayor, but I think, it's important that we hold out some of the good things that are going on in West Midlands in terms of the Mental Health Commission that they've run there, in terms of the programmes that they have called Thrive Into Work, where they've had 900 people going through supported interventions to get back to work, and they see that those people going back into work have 50% less use of primary care than they had before. So I think we've got to start to see this drive to reduce inequalities and improve health as something that we can all commit to as a country. And I think also we've got to start looking at some of the ways in which we need to govern differently to do that. And one of my colleagues at the Health Foundation, Anita Charlesworth, published a paper about 2 weeks ago with Demos that was talking about the need to think differently about prevention spending. So at the moment, governments think about capital spending and revenue spending, but that revenue spending could be on, fixing the problems of homelessness, or it could be investing in housing. It could be spending on, fixing people in A&E who have come to harm through substance misuse, or it could be in prevention services. And what we see happens at the moment, because we have no way of ring-fencing prevention spending, is that the money always goes into the acute area of spend and the crisis spend and fixing people when things have gone wrong. And what we need to do is make sure we're investing in prevention. So I'd really recommend that paper. I think there's got to be, there just has to be a sort of real shift in the way we're thinking about health and the way we govern, and that we see it as something that everybody takes responsibility for.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I endorsed that Demos paper, was very strong. We to plug, some IPPR work landed in a similar place today, so it feels like there's some momentum around that kind of thinking. Afia?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what everyone said. I guess just to come back on the financial point is, I would say that generally we can't really afford not to invest. The nation is getting sicker and poorer, and one way we'll be sort of paying one way or another when it comes to public health crises. So making a sort of financial case could be, in some ways, sort of putting levies on sort of health polluters, gambling companies. You know, there are lots of companies that make a lot of money from poor health. So there are, maybe when it comes to sort of Devo deals, having conversations like that and putting those kinds of powers and levers on the table as well. And then also just bringing in communities when it comes to redesigning the places that they live in. There are so many different ways that you can engage with communities, co-design, participatory budgeting, and that can really get them sort of get their buy-in when it comes to these sort of new deals. And Power to Change have done some really great work on community improvement districts where people are really part of kind of redesigning their high streets that kind of have really great outcomes for sort of well-being and the kind of more social aspect of health as well.
Brilliant, really well put, thank you. I think we've got time for another round. I've got a question from the lady with the very, very sweet dog.
Oh, excuse me. I need 2 new knees, and I've been waiting for 2.5 years, so I'm now going private. I'm a Bristol girl. My dad's a bookmaker, was a bookmaker. Just want to let you know, the bookmakers never get it wrong. Never. That's why they make money, and we're going to win. My husband was a Member of Parliament for 8 years. I think with Dan, Ian Coleman. He had 8 strokes. He was the leader of Hammersmith and Fulham Council for 8 years before he became the Member of Parliament. We made him be the mayor for a year. He hated it, but never mind. You know. When he was the leader of the council, he made a decision that we would introduce free social care. There is an economic case. It is cheaper to close your residential care homes, to keep people at home, to give them care. It's cheaper for councils. If you want to see it in action, please will someone do a study on Hammersmith and Fulham and come and speak to me about the economics of free social care. Now, we need money. Please, Dan, please speak to Rachel Reeves. We have to reform inheritance tax. Only poor people and middle-class people pay it. I'm an expert. The rich don't pay it. So if we want some money to pay for social care, reform IHT. And my last point is this. I have been excluded from conference because I don't have a letter from my consultant to say that my dog is a working dog. I rang my GP this morning. Do you know how long she's going to take to write a letter for me? 28 days. So I'm now going to have to go to my private consultant. But by the time he does it, conference will be over. So perhaps all of you could actually make a representation on my behalf. I'm Dame Sally Powell, ex-NEC, can't get to conference because I'm disabled. It's shocking. And I don't know whether to go to the Daily Mail or not.
Thank you for sharing that. I think, should we reform free social care, inheritance tax, and the state of footnotes from GPs and other letter writing is a good thing for us to discuss. Were there other questions people wanted to raise? There's a hand there.
Thank you. My name's Sarah Gillinson. I lead an organisation, a social enterprise called Innovation Unit, and we work in local places to bring together communities and charities in the statutory sector to try and come up with more of the brilliant solutions that you are describing here today. And one of the things that we see over and over again is that these kinds of things that you're describing endlessly remain on the periphery and don't become the norm, not the mainstream. Now, completely agree that devolution is a big part of the answer as to how you put more resources in people's hands to invest in these things. But there are also some consistent barriers in the plumbing of how we run public services at local level that get in the way of these things. Stuff around governance, who gets to take decisions and how, where the money flows, the things that we measure that stop us from focusing on big shared outcomes. So I just wonder which of those sort of barriers in the plumbing of how we do things at the moment you would most like to shift in order for this stuff to move from the margins into the mainstream.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Maybe one more at the back, perhaps? Sorry, I'm making our mic, roving mic move. I think it was just at the back there. Sorry, Ali. Thank you.
Hi, Tallulah from the Centre for Local Economic Strategies. I was quite interested in the kind of conversation about child obesity, and often we talk about free school meals and the provision of them to alleviate some of that. And I just wondered if we'd looked at this from an adult perspective and the decline of workplace canteens and what the role of local leaders could perhaps be in the future in influencing locally rooted anchor organisations to provide that to provide food for workers?
Great question, thanks very much. So we have the state of adult social care and its economic case and how we fund it, something on how we stop the things that we're talking about, the innovations we're talking about sitting on the periphery and what within the plumbing of public services we need to change to make that happen. And within the context, perhaps of childhood obesity, how do we use our anchor institutions and incentivize them to be part of that solution? Dan, what do you think?
Well, if I deal with the inheritance tax one, and I'll let others answer the other questions perhaps, look, we definitely need to deal with inheritance tax because you're absolutely right. Rich people don't pay it because what they do is they set up trust funds and they avoid paying it, and all that kind of stuff. I'm hoping that because the Labour leader is an eminent lawyer and very famous for it, that he might be on it. Well, I appreciate that's not his specialism, but I bet he knows a few tax lawyers, so we'll need to get there. But look, it is crazy that people of means can avoid paying tax while regular people end up paying disproportionately high amounts of it. Yeah. So I think I'll stop there because I'll let other people answer the questions as well.
Brilliant, thank you.
So just to pick up on the social care point, absolutely, being in your home is a much more effective way. It's also a more desirable way. You, quite frankly, don't always want to have visiting hours. You want to be able to come and go. And in Milton Keynes, that is always our priority, is to keep people at home for as long as possible. And unlike a lot of local authorities, we directly employ some of the more specialist home care staff that are needed to support our residents. We also, we ran a trial, because I believe you should have as much choice as you can in how and where you die, so you can now die in your own home in Milton Keynes, and that is a very important innovation, I think, in giving people that empowerment in those last few days, weeks, and months. The problems in the plumbing, yeah. So there are problems in the plumbing. So I was involved in Total Place. That kind of starts to give you my age. And then set up the Public Services by Design program at the Design Council in terms of working with social designers. The biggest problems are the competition on budgets. And until we get to some place-based budgeting, which is what really Total Place was trying to achieve, we won't get there. Now, I'm going to be controversial here. I think bringing place into the ICBs, I don't like health reorganization, but the ICBs, we actually have some place-based budgeting now going on, particularly because on our ICB, which is BLMK, so Bedford, Luton, and Milton Keynes, we also have our place-based boards. So there's a separate board for Milton Keynes where we are talking about it, which means we can bring things like the clubs that I was talking about to that board to say, and we, and our Director of Public Health is at that board talking about the social determinants of health as a way of framing the priorities for us. And so that's very exciting, and that actually does work. What doesn't work is the money still has difficulty flowing from above. So we just got given dentistry, but we're not allowed to change any contracts. Well, then why are you giving us responsibility for dentistry? Is it just so you can blame us when people can't get appointments, quite frankly? So that's the problem with it. You've got to give us both the power and the resources, and you have to allow us to find a way of sharing the savings. So if the council's spending, and the saving is in the hospital, or with GPs, or whatever it might be, there's got to be a way of rewarding the council for that investment, and that's the bit we still haven't cracked.
That's spot on. Jo, over to you.
Yeah, well, I think they're all huge questions, aren't they? Social care, obesity, public service, finance. I think probably just the one thing I would say is there is something about the way in which councils can think about themselves as anchor institutions in their communities, and what are they doing to kind of model what they want to see others doing. So thinking very much about the food environment they create, for instance, seems to be one way in which they can kind of role model some positive change. But I think ultimately there's something about how do we really make it clear that people's health is going to be a constraint on growth, and it's only until we invest in health will we get the growth that all the parties are talking about.
And over to you, Thea.
Okay, so there's lots of different points. I think so. Hammersmith and Fulham are a great borough. I've spoken to people there, obviously really leading the way when it comes to supporting disabled people in the borough. And yeah, I think one of the things that they've done really well is actually create a hybrid role where people are kind of half in the community and half working in the council. So it's a really great example of sort of participatory sort of engagement with citizens. I guess when it comes to social care, I guess local authorities can't fulfill their statutory duties because they don't have the resources and the capacity. So I think a lot of it comes down to that, sadly, and I think that's something that needs to be reformed 100%. And then I think workplace canteens as well. I think that's a brilliant idea, to be honest, and something that I would like to look into a bit more. But what I would say is that capacity, I don't think we've mentioned that yet, but I think capacity, if we can increase people's capacity, people will then make better choices for their health if they have the means to. So I like the idea of maybe bringing back canteens, but that also means that they need to be in workplaces where people are paid well, work isn't making them sick, there's good occupational health, and in those places, if they want to have their lunch at the canteen, that's a good thing, but they don't have to because they have, all of their needs are essentially met via their job.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I may at that point start to wrap us up, but I wanted to just give a bit of a summary of what we've heard. I think we started this conversation with just the tremendous change that places can make when empowered to make change. We heard the burning need for this in terms of the state of our health. What the Health Foundation have shown is the kind of worrying projections of where we could get to without intervention, and the link that health has to the economy. So the burning platform for it feels very real. So a mix then of a big challenge for us to take on, but some optimism in terms of what's at stake and how much I think can be achieved across both health and prosperity. For the part of IPPR, we'll be continuing to think about this very closely through the Commission on Health and Prosperity. Towards the end of the year, you can expect some more research from us thinking about how we catalyse this as, to your question earlier, an innovation agenda and really spread that innovation that's happening in places across the whole country. I'd like to thank again the Health Foundation for partnering with us on today's event, for making it happen, and to everyone that's been doing mics or setting up the event as well. finally, to our panelists, thank you for joining us. I thought it was a fascinating conversation. We got through an awful lot, so a big thank you for contributing so openly. And thank you, everyone, for coming. We'll hope to see you around other conference events. Do come back here for more IPPR Fringe events in this room. But thank you very much.